That is, as far as I can remember. I cannot confirm it now. I can't find it anywhere on the site because the homepage has been updated. If we had the time machine that Daniela Florescu had described this morning, we might be able to check. But for now, you're going to have to take it on faith, take it from me. Temporal aspects of XML. So I've been thinking about temporal aspects of XML as I prepare for the conference. Maybe it's just because I'm a medievalist, but that my first instinct, no, everyone will have shared this instinct. My first instinct, of course, is to look up the passage in Augustine's Confessions where he talks about time. And he says, suppose I'm about to recite a psalm which I know. Before I begin, my expectation, or looking forward, is extended over the whole psalm. But once I've begun, whatever I pluck off from it and let fall into the past enters the province of my memory, or looking back at it. So the life of this action of mine is extended in two directions, toward my memory as regards what I've recited, and towards my expectation as regards what I'm about to recite. But all the time, my attention, my looking at, is present, and through it, what was future passes on its way to become past. And as I proceed further and further with my recitation, so the expectation grows shorter, and the memory grows longer, until all the expectation is finished at the point when the whole of this action is over and is passed into the memory. And what is true of the whole psalm is also true of every part of the psalm and of every syllable in it. Now, our situation differs from the one described by Augustine in two ways. We are a collective, not a single individual, and we don't know how the psalm goes on. But as regards this conference, we are almost at the end of the action. And like Augustine, we can see that almost all our expectations for this conference are finished, and we can review the conference now not in expectation, but in memory. Time has left its traces in our discussions here in a variety of subtle and not so subtle ways. We began the conference with Michael K. describing recent work on the streaming of XSLT transformation, that is, recent work for the working group, but for others outside the working group, the word that came to my mind listening to Michael was the German word Zukunftsmusik. That is, we got a little glimpse of what is still for everyone outside the working group future, and in fact for most of the people in the working group also still future in the sense of having more than one implementation that supports it. Tony Graham similarly described what one speaker I once heard described as the recent future. That is, it's past for some, the speaker, but still in the future for everyone else. But Tony, of course, also gave us a very firm reminder of the past, indeed, the very distant past, and a reminder to look at essentials. If we want XML to be usable for all of our data, I can't speak for everyone here, but certainly that's part of what I want, then we have to be able to produce displays, whether on paper or screen, that are formatted to an acceptable standard. And bear in mind that the acceptable standard for textual material is the product of hundreds, thousands of years of experience. And one of the things that graphic designers have learned over the years is that making the book more beautiful will often make it more functional. And making it more functional will almost always make it more beautiful. Never underestimate the importance of making the display more functional and more beautiful. And then we got to the present. Norm Walsh, in the spirit of the old song, anything you can do, I can do better, or at least perfectly well enough, without abandoning my current technology in order to adopt yours. Norm showed us how general purpose vocabularies like DocBook can be used to perform special tasks like concept and combination, which might at first glance seem to require special purpose tools and special purpose vocabularies. You know, strictly speaking, I important to maintain those collective memories through exchanges like Sharon's talk this morning. And then at the end, she pointed us very firmly into the future by reminding us, yes, for all the stuff we've done, semantics still remains a completely unsolved problem. It's essential because semantics has always been a crucial part of the enterprise of descriptive markup. Knowing that this thing is an element and this thing is an attribute doesn't tell you what your document means, any more than knowing that this is a subject and this is a predicate and that is an object, or this is a circle and that is an arrow, tells you what an RDF graph means. The difference is perhaps that, for reasons I've never been able to understand, many RDF people believe that mapping things to circles and arrows gives you semantics. That's never been an illusion that descriptive markup people have suffered from. The meaning that counts for our models, for our formal representations, whether RDF or XML, includes both the formal properties of the things we build, which we can use to allow or disallow certain operations. It also includes the relation of those models and their formal properties to the real world. And we're not alone in not having anything reliable or useful to say about that. If you look in textbooks of formal logic for an explication of how the formal properties of logical statements relate to reality, they are calling for washing basins of water and washing their hands. That's not the problem, that's out of scope. It's out of scope perhaps for people purely engaged in defining formal systems, but it can't be out of scope for us because those meanings are included in crucial they're crucial properties of what we're building. Liam Quinn also took us into the future. Future :XML, on the future of XML and W3C and elsewhere, of course. If XML is going to have a future, we have to build it. The future, as he said, is mutable. If the promises of XML and of descriptive markup have all been redeemed and no work remains to be done, then we can all go home. But if there is still work to be done, then we need people to do it. And I'm glad that you're here to work on it. One important temporal aspect of XML descriptive markup, was mentioned by Sharon this morning. It's about making our XML data last longer than the applications that create it and process it. Now on this topic, please forgive a shameless plug for the sister conference Balayage 2010 and for the pre-conference symposium under the title XML for the Long Haul, which is precisely on this issue of the preservation of XML markup systems and applications and their semantics for the long haul. I was tempted to emulate Mohammed Zagawi and take a slot in the demo jam last night to say, August 2nd, it will happen in Montreal. Have you started writing your Balayage abstract yet? Get going, you have about a month. Many wonderful things will happen in Balayage. There will be a beer jam, I think. Good. There will be wonderful talks. One of the wonderful things for many people is that they will not have gone through U.S. Customs to get through. Come to Balayage. End of commercial interruption. We now return you to our regularly scheduled program. For many people, of course, part of the problem of time, that is the reason they regard time as a problem, and are able to say things like a problem of time, as if everyone else was going to understand what they were talking about, is mutability. Things are subject to change. exists so that everything doesn't happen all at once. And in some sense puts it in a nutshell. We know that time exists because things happen. Sometimes, as Quinn put it the other day, schemas happen. And when schemas happen, particularly when schemas change, when changes to schemas happen, then all hell can break loose. And so I was glad to see Tony Coates' paper showing us one way to deal with that kind of problem. His ingenious, I can only call it an ingenious system for teasing out some sizable subset of the implications of schema changes and realizing them as strings in a way that you can feed to a standard diff processor and get useful output from. Very, very cool work. I give it ingenuity. It can authentic power is not something you see every day. And we had a whole series of talks. I can't go into detail about all of them, from Lawrence Fendenover and George Bina and Stefan Sia and others, and the panel on editing, all showing us work on mutability where the rubber meets the road from an extremely practical point of view, the point of view of maintaining the software that we use to exercise mutability on our documents, to change them. How to handle changes, how to handle schemas, and in the work of Stefan Sia, especially how to hide the mechanisms. Now, I spent a lot of time in my youth studying the work of Bertolt Brecht. And Brecht, Brecht is the subject of a famous story that seems to suggest, it makes me feel guilty at admiring the work that Stefan Sia described. The story goes that Brecht was working in his apartment, and a worker from the Berliner Ensemble came to put up new curtains. So he puts up the curtain rod, and he puts the curtains up, and he starts to install a valance over the curtain rod to sort of hide the curtain hooks. And Brecht comes in and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm putting up a valance." And he says, No, that hides the mechanism. Never hide the mechanism. And if you grew up with functionalism as an aesthetic movement, hiding the mechanism may trouble you. If you've spent as many hours of your life as many of us have understanding the details of XML syntax and the mechanisms, it may pain you to see them hidden. But I have to admit that I found the interface the interface shown very attractive. Perhaps this is because I've recently spent time teaching a number of people who are not technically inclined to how to maintain their website. It's a sobering experience to discover that people who not only don't understand HTML, have not heard of HTML, and have no distinguishable desire to learn HTML, how do you teach them making a website? We'll see whether I succeed. But in any case, hiding the mechanism is certainly the only way that you will ever communicate with them. In connection with editors, I have to stress one aspect of some of the technologies that we've seen here, Xforms and various of the libraries. They make it feasible not just to do better than HTML forms. They make it feasible because out the back end, they are editing XML documents. They make it feasible to write special purpose XML editors for specific vocabularies and specific editorial tasks. That is, they reduce the cost of what Henry Thompson taught me years ago to call padded cell editors. In any project that works with XML, we have a lot of routine maintenance work to do that's repetitive and that may be slightly boring. And often you have specialized editing tasks to be done by domain experts who may not know XML and who may not be familiar with general purpose XML to check your sentence segmentation if you're building a language corpus. How to use a general purpose XML editor, and then you set them to go through and check the sentence segmentation provided by your software. If they get bored, which is not unlikely when you're checking sentence segmentation in a language corpus, if they get bored, there's no end to the damage they can do in the general purpose editor. What you really would like to do is give them an interface where the only thing they can do is open a document, look at the sentence boundaries, click on a boundary to say there should be no boundary here, click on something that's not a boundary to say split this alleged sentence because it's really two, and close the file. That's it. If you give them an interface with, well, you need to open, save, or abort, and split and join. If you give them an interface with only 5 actions, it's a lot faster to teach them than to teach them XML or Emacs or your XML editor of choice. And there's a lot less damage they can do. If we could, if it were economically feasible, that would be the right thing to do for all sorts of tasks. A special purpose tool to do just that task. But it's prohibitively expensive if it's 60,000 lines of Java to do it. If it's 300 lines of XHTML plus Xforms, or the equivalent in any of these libraries, then it becomes economically and technically feasible in a way that it wasn't before. This is an aspect of Xforms that I don't see a lot of people talking about, although it seems to me by far the most important. Because for purposes of pad and cell editing, it doesn't matter whether all of the browsers in the world support Xforms or Xquery. It only matters whether you can get the browser support that you need in the work group that you're working with. And finally, of course, still on this notion of mutability, Daniela Forescu showing us in her time machine that with XML and with relatively modest conceptual extensions to the XDM data model, it may be possible to handle mutability in our formal systems better than we've ever been able to do in the past. As she pointed out, quite often one of the things you really want to know about any individual piece of information is, where did this come from? What is its heritage? What is its authentication? Who introduced it into the document? Who reviewed the document and left it here? If you have the kind of change tracking that she's talking about and that other people have talked about in other ways, then you have a prayer of answering those questions, which are questions that have always been extremely difficult to answer in electronic systems. Now, I mentioned earlier the refito that begins timing this so that everything doesn't happen all at once. Some of you will have been waiting ever since then for the second line, which of course is space exists so that everything doesn't happen to you. Time and space, well-known trade-offs, and analogies. Quite often, space savings translate to time savings in optimization. And similarly, if you have as a goal ensuring long life for your data, you want to preserve your data into the future, how do you test whether the systems you built will be able to do that or not? You can't, because you can't go into the future and then come back and get a test and make a test report. The best you can do is to say, well, what do we know about the future? They will have different kinds of devices and they will be interested in different kinds of applications. The best approximation you can have to checking for longevity into the future is checking that data can be used across applications, across devices, and across geographic separation today. So, many of the papers that we've heard that talk about ubiquity seem to be also, at least in this indirect way, to be related to temporal aspects of XML. One of the best ways for XML or any technology to survive into the distant future, of course, is to become ubiquitous, or as nearly ubiquitous as you can. Felix Azami's paper struck me as interesting for two reasons related to ubiquity. One is that Japanese layout, of course, is challenging for a lot of software. And as I said at the outset, if you want XML to be adequate to the data, you have to be able to display the data usefully. And the second aspect, hiding the angle brackets from users can be critical to success. That's part of ubiquity. And also knowing when to apply technologies and when not to apply particular technologies. Felix's use of generic vocabularies with additional application conventions reminded me in some ways of Norm's specialized use of DocBook. Ubiquity may entail hiding some of the time, or not being everywhere all of the time. The end users don't always want to see XML. Benjamin Balk described an apparent exception to the proposition that XML is or can be ubiquitous. Topic maps, remember, he reported, split off from the book and ran away from XML. But Benjamin, remember this. You can run, but you can't hide. XML will find you and we will gather the topic maps community back into our loving bosom. One other aspect of ubiquity, of course, is the long march into programming environments. There are too many contributions in this category for me to mention them all, but Laurent Georges' description of tools, which we can have right now at the present, just for the cost of installing them and learning to use them, come to mind. If we have the data that we care about in XML, and we want to use XML-aware programming tools like XSLT and XQuery, ideally all of the time, then tools like the ones Laurent was describing are important because they reduce the need to escape to other languages to do important things like running a zip or an unzip or receiving and sending HTTP messages. Matthias Brunner's work on standardizing the sort of the periphery of XQuery, and again XQuery in the cloud, also impressive contributions in this area. Marcus Pillman's demo of XQuery in the browser. Exchange at the end. The point of having XQuery in the browser in the way that he showed it was to do without glue code in JavaScript. And you notice the first question that everybody asked was, well, can I get access to that from JavaScript? Some people like glue, I guess. We all like glue from time to time. And the crucial part of achieving ubiquity, of course, is attention to execution time, whether it's fair or unfair, wise or unwise. Whenever any technology gets widespread enough, people will start complaining that it's inefficient. So Michael Kay, the work Michael Kay described on improving latency and speed of XSLT transformations by reducing memory use is important. I was struck by O'Neill Delaprat's compact representation of XML, which by itself almost satisfies the definition of streamability in that its memory usage is sublinear in the size of the input. Interesting alternative to all the work that the XSLT working group has been doing. And finally, some of the contributions have focused on temporal aspects of XML in the sense of real-time execution or explicit description of time in the data, or both. Ari Nordstrom's marvelously detailed description of film presentation technology. I always like to learn about things I knew nothing about and didn't know I was interested in learning about. But if you've ever wondered why HighTime was so complicated, just remember, HighTime was trying to do all of that kind of thing without actually mentioning any concrete element names or structures. It's hard enough if you are able and willing to put stakes in the ground here and there. If you refuse to do that, you just make things harder. And Mark House, interesting work on real-time XSLT processing. I am astonished to learn that Java, as shipped by Michael Kay, admittedly by Michael Kay, but Java as shipped is slightly faster than carefully hand-tuned C. Yeah, that's something. And, well, in the right hand of him that sat on the throne, an XML document, canonicalized and serialized with EXI, containing 7 pi trees, encrypted with 7 public key encryption key pairs. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to parse the XML document and to decrypt the encryption thereof? And no one in heaven, nor in earth, neither under the earth was able to parse the XML document, neither by buffering it in memory, nor by processing it in streaming. And I wept much. Because no man was found worthy to parse and to process the XML document, neither to exploit its vocabulary-specific semantics, nor to perform vocabulary-independent printing thereon. And one of the elders said to me, weep not. Behold, the standards-compliant XML application with support for C14n and EXI, for XML encryption and schema validation, and for interoperable stylesheet technologies like XSLT 17.2 and XSL FO 42.0,